Welcome here at the Amsterdam edition of Sharing is Caring. It's my great privilege to welcome you here. Somebody yesterday, much smarter than me, called it the motley crew of like-minded spirits that are generated here and that will come here. So I know it's the end of the year and things are piling up for a lot of us. So it's really nice that you took the time and effort to come here in person to talk with us and with each other. I would like to welcome you, but also thank you for coming here and the Rijksmuseum for hosting this conference, but also the program committee, of which only Wilbert Helmus could join us here, and I can't see really where he's sitting. Hi, over there. And during the talks about which speakers we would invite, there was quite a complicated thing in the fact that Wilbert and Herbert Van de Sample was also part of the program committee, so I kept confusing them both. But Loïc Salon, the former CDO of the Metropolitan Museum, who is now living in Amsterdam, also joined the program committee. And of course, Merete Sanderhoff, the inspirator and founder of Sharing is Caring. I would also like to thank the speakers, of which I see Joe arriving. Some of them were contacted really late, and I really appreciate the fact that everybody took the time and effort to come. And lastly, I want to thank you to be here and to join us. This is the team that I'm really, really proud of. It's the Department of Research Services here at the Rijksmuseum. In 2016, the Rijksmuseum decided to centralize all the departments and sub-departments that were responsible for information and data. And while the mission of the Rijksmuseum is to connect people with art and history, the mission of our department is to connect people with art and history to information and data. And what we often tend to say is the fact that and information and data is the glue that connects everything together. Two of the departments, of the sub-departments within research services are organizing this conference. And you will meet the heads and the coordinator of the departments later on. Chris and Martin will present some of the work that we have been doing for the past few months in the last year. In 2013, the Rijksmuseum opened with a bang. This is an image that is very often an image that I'm using when I want to talk about the open data that the Rijksmuseum, the open data policy that the Rijksmuseum decided to launch. Not only in 2013, but in 2011, we released already a first data set, and because of the response there and also the support of Europeana, we decided in 2013 to release everything of the collection data, which coincided beautifully with the opening of the Rijksmuseum after 10 years of closure. But I'm also, in heart and mind, a librarian. So it's nice to be able to say that in 2002 already, the Rijksmuseum Research Library, although really secretly and not very communicatively, opened its data already. I think what we see now, and some of the people in the audience, I know the head of research of the Conservation and Science Department here, Katrin Keune, is already in the audience, but also some members of the Conservation Department as well. They are really the force and driver of what we at the moment see, that the object-based research within the Rijksmuseum is really taking off. very much a data-driven approach, which caused the Rijksmuseum to reassess some of the infrastructure that we're building or that we're having, and to expand on that. And there's more and more collection data. I think expand the source, the subtext of this Sharing is Caring conference is influenced by that. But there's also more and more diverse collection data, not only collection data, but archival data, library data, and a big part research data that we need to find a solution for and that we want to share with everybody. And basically that is the reason why we wanted to organize this day, to go from the open data policies that we have and the open data mindset that the Rijksmuseum so promoted, to thinking and speaking with you and with others within the Rijksmuseum about the need for a more nuanced approach, and talking about fair GLAM data. I think that's one of the things that time is ripe. It's important to do that. And for us, this marks the start of a new dialogue that we are having. I think this is an image of somebody who's also in the audience, Patrick Horstenbach, a former colleague of mine, who aptly described and drew the data principles that we're elaborating on today. I think one of the challenges that we have at the moment is that the GLAM data really has to act and perform within a network level. And the influences that it have are beautifully described in a recently launched, only 2 weeks ago, a recently published book. And one of the articles here by Ed Rodley, The Distributed Museum, aptly describes the challenges of a decentralized and distributed landscape that we have to make our data and information work in. I think that is also one of the challenges that is very much being recognized by the network Digitaal Erfgoed, of which also a lot of people here are present. I think the Netherlands can pride itself on the existence of this network that drives the conversation about how can we activate the digital heritage data that we have, and that is so important to connect. This event is in my mind, the unofficial kickoff of what will happen next week. There's the Week of the Digital Heritage in the Netherlands, where all across the Netherlands there will be events organized, among others a symposium about public infrastructure. I think that is really interesting and worthwhile to attend. But also a hackathon about linked open data that will be organized in the most beautiful but kind of surreal environment in the middle of the Netherlands, where there's an abandoned radio station where people will gather, and I'm proud to say that some of our people will also attend and try to make beautiful things. But at the same time, there's also in Lisbon the Europeana general meeting that will be held, where some of us also will present and talk about what we're trying to do at the Rijksmuseum. And only this autumn, there have been several interesting and relevant conferences to what we are telling. The Museum Computer group in the UK gave a presentation, or organized a whole day around openness, where Loïc Talon gave the keynote with very lively discussions. But we had a digital summit of the museum next, and only last week there was the MCN in San Diego, where a lot of the discussions centered around the need for a stable infrastructure and a maintenance spirit that we need to keep a focus on. But this is really the structure or the organization and the meetings that we will inscribe this meeting here. And there's a whole chain, and I'm happy to say that people from the Brussels extension, I saw Ronnie Visser here as well from PACT in Flanders, who organized that Sharing is Caring extension. And only 2-3 months ago in Stockholm, there was another extension where Trineke from our staff attended as well. So I think you see the progression of the themes that are being addressed. I think the only person that we're really missing at the moment is the founder and inspiration of Sharing is Caring, Merete Sanderhoff. And she found it very unfortunate that she couldn't be here. But during our conversations, she very often mentions the fact that she likes to play music, which reminded me of my favorite book by Richard Sennett, who's a sociologist and a philosopher who's talking about cooperation. And I think she sent me some pictures of the quartet that she's playing on. And Richard Sennett had a beautiful first chapter on a book about cooperation, which is the cooperative frame of mind, where he combines the fact that music is actually a kind of collaboration and a conversation that we're having. And I couldn't help thinking that what we are doing here and what Sharing is Caring is doing in all the extensions that have been organized is the fact that we are having a conversation and actually we're playing music together. So let's play. Now there's the director of the Rijksmuseum wanted to welcome you all as well, but unfortunately he had another meeting to attend, so he couldn't be here in person. But he insisted on welcoming you all. So I think that is what you will see on the screen next.
Welcome to Amsterdam, to the Rijksmuseum, to this session of the Sharing is Caring conference. We believe that the collections of the Rijksmuseum belong to everyone, and therefore we want to share our knowledge. In 2013, when we opened the Rijksmuseum, the new Rijksmuseum, we decided to share our images with the whole world. And since then we've been digitizing the collection with basic collection information and wonderful high-resolution images. But sharing goes much further. We feel that we should not only keep the collection, share the collection, but also share our knowledge, because the Rijksmuseum is not only a keeper of objects, but a keeper of knowledge and a generator of knowledge. And therefore we need knowledge from everybody to be shared in the Rijksmuseum. Sharing is not that easy as it seems, because in recent years we've accumulated so much data that the way we structure this data, the way we make this data accessible becomes more and more important. If you take sharing really seriously, you have to take care that this enormous amount of knowledge that is kept and generated in the Rijksmuseum by its staff and by researchers from outside is findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. Today, the conference will tackle these subjects, and I wish you a great conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's start right away. Next presentation will be by Maarten Heerlien and Chris Dijkshoorn. Maarten Heerlien is head of the Collection Information Department, and Chris Dijkshoorn is head of the Collection IT Department. And together they will introduce to you Rijksdata.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Maarten Heerlien, and I am, like Bas said, the head of the Rijksmuseum's Collection Information Subdepartment. Now, as a resource, collection information is at the basis of a lot of processes here in the Rijksmuseum. And as such, it is one of the most important resources that our institution creates and maintains. And although my sub-department is to an extent involved in all of those processes, we are first and foremost in the service of research. Through the data and information that we maintain, we aim to support all those who seek to understand and to create new knowledge about the past, culture, social structures, material properties, etc. Now, one of the ways that we've been doing that is through sharing our core collection data, our bibliographical data, and high resolutions of images, which Taco and Saskia already referred to, but actually there is much, much more. We have so much more data that puts our common heritage in a broader context. Take, for instance, this seemingly unremarkable object. This is actually this is an object from our collection, and it is a historical object, and it is a set of cutlery used by a prisoner in the Nazi concentration camp of Dachau during the Second World War. Now, this is all described in the core collections data, which you can download through the API. But what the data does not describe is the touching story behind it. And that is a story of a desperate search of the children of the man to whom this set of cutlery was dispensed in the camp, to find out what happened to him and to find out whether he was even alive after the war ended. And he was alive after the war ended. So the final chapter of that story is the family receiving a letter from a Dutch government agency telling them that their father is recovering in a hospital in the city of Eindhoven and awaits for them to pick them up, and bring him home. Now, we know this because we have the correspondence that documents this story in the Rijksmuseum. This documentation enriches our knowledge of this object in more than one ways, and like it, we have much more documentation that places objects in a broader context, which tells us a lot more about the collection. And these documents are gathered throughout the 200 years history of the Rijksmuseum, which amounts to hundreds of meters of paper, all tucked away in paper files and archives. But it will amount to several terabytes, probably, or even more, of digital images and documents in the near future, because this year we started an ambitious project to digitize this collective memory of the Rijksmuseum. Likewise, we never learned more about the physical characteristics of our objects, of our heritage, than in the past few years. The image that we used in the promotion of this conference is actually a screenshot of an application developed by a senior scientist of ours, Robert Erdman. And this application enables researchers, conservators, and anyone basically who is interested to simultaneously host several very incredibly high-resolution images of a painting, in this case, taken with various different techniques, so they can compare and examine the various physical and chemical aspects of an artwork. Technical art history, for instance, nowadays borrows more and more techniques from the natural sciences, and the result is an ever-expanding collection of increasingly heterogeneous data. And here at the Rijksmuseum, in a recent study, a recent survey that we did, it turned out that we maintain data sets in over 250 different file formats, many of which are proprietary, some are obsolete. And together, currently this amounts to 22 terabytes of centrally stored data. And with the Night Watch project, which you will be all a witness to later today, that is going on, this is expanding rapidly. Now, the increase in both volume and heterogeneity of the data that we as museums and knowledge institutions produce, and our ambition to share with our audiences is bringing us to a point where the regular traditional information architecture in a museum is no longer fit for purpose. In the case of the Rijksmuseum, the redevelopment of our information architecture, the redevelopment of our data policies, and the redevelopment of the internal support infrastructure for data and information management are all in the works. And the FAIR guiding principles are an important aspects we are looking into in those efforts. Now, first of all, I want to stress that I do not regard the FAIR data principles as the answer to all of our questions, because FAIR is not a blueprint that provides you with a set of off-the-shelf solutions to make your data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Nor is FAIR actually new. I mean, sure, the FAIR data guidelines have been published only in 2016, but especially in the heritage community, I think we have been working for years and years to make, to improve the findability and accessibility and the interoperability and the reusability within and across collections, and organizations such as Europeana and CDOC and the J. Paul Getty Trust, and in the Netherlands the Dutch Digital Heritage Network, are among the driving forces in this. But the study and the management and the preservation of heritage becomes more and more data-driven. And as the output grows larger and more complex, we have to start thinking about how to manage the full life cycle of those data. Because this data will tell later generations how we took care of their data. And FAIR is a good start to manage that data. The FAIR principles can be a good set of reference points, a framework for connecting our resources to national and international infrastructures for open data and open science in the most effective and sustainable way. And since we are at the beginning of expanding this source of collection-related data, now is a good time to start this discussion and show you the steps that we have already undertaken so far towards FAIR data. And now I give the microphone to Chris.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Dijkshoorn. Since last summer, I'm the coordinator of Collection IT. As you can see, Maarten before actually had some slides with almost no text at all. So I tried to do the same, but I miserably failed. As diverse as our data is, as diverse as our documentation was. So you see here all different types of domains, different types of ways of accessing our information. And actually, people had a really hard time finding all the really nice stuff that we had on offer online. So today we're actually launching a new Rijksdata platform. And as you can see, there are still 2 different locations. But not 2 different locations because of technology or domains, but actually for different types of uses of the data. So there's one general description on the website where we have an overview of what we all have to offer, and we introduce the open data policy. But we also have the more technical documentation, which is now all collected on data.rijksmuseum.nl. As you can see here, this is live right now. This is something where we actually structured around the different topics that we have on offer. So we have object metadata, we have bibliographic data, there are controlled vocabularies, user-generated content, and we actually structured it so that you can find it how you can access this. And when you actually browse around the site, you will notice that not everything can be accessed in the same way. So this is also our message that we want to get across. This is something that we will keep extending when we get more data on offer. We will keep extending it when we have all the ways, the complete spectrum of how you could access this information. So, moving forward, as Maarten already mentioned, there will be more and more data available. For the collection data, we're actually pretty much already getting it fairer and fairer. So we have persistent identifiers, we use structured vocabularies, you use standardized protocols like HTTP and OAI PMH to access it. And we're working together with, for example, IIIF and LinkedR to see how we can actually use community standards to move forward. This is something that we will keep incorporating in our infrastructure and keep expanding it, and keep an eye on Rijksdata to actually see what in the future we all have to offer. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Chris and Martin. If you have questions for Chris and Martin, please keep them for later. Now we come to today's keynote speech, and we are very happy that Dr. Ingrid Deel is here with us today. Ingrid Deel is Deputy Director at DANS, Data Archiving and Network Services in The Hague. Ingrid will present to us her vision on sharing research data in a presentation called Sharing Research Data, a ver e-tail.
So what I would like to do is first tell you a little bit about the organization where I come from, then talk about data sharing and data quality, and from there I will go to fair data. After that, talk a little bit about trust, a very important topic when you talk about data sharing and certification, and then finally I will go into the question what all of this from the perspective of science could mean for the clam sector. So, now I need to do something, yeah. So first of all, about DANS. DANS is a data service provider. It is an institute of the Dutch Academy of Arts and Sciences, the KNW, and NWO, the Dutch National Research Council. And we were set up in 2005, so we exist around 15 years, and we have around 50 people working at DANS. And we are built on a couple of much older archives that were mainly in the area of the social sciences and the humanities. So we have data at DANS that go back over 50 years. But nowadays we have a rather broad mission which says that we need to promote and provide permanent access to digital research resources. So you see that the social sciences and humanities are no longer specifically in our mission. Here you see the core services that we provide at DANS. A very important one is the repository that we have for the long-term preservation of research data. And that is a repository that now holds, as you can see, 117,000 data sets. Again, there still is a large focus on the humanities and the social sciences, but we have also data coming from other fields like medical data and life sciences data, for example. Next to that, we host Narcis, and Narcis is you could say, the national gateway to scholarly information in the Netherlands. That means that it holds metadata that come from all the publications of the universities, 2 million in total. We also have metadata on data sets, not only from DANS, but also from other organizations. And we have a lot of information on research projects, researchers, and research institutions in the Netherlands. Finally, we provide what is called the Dataverse NL network. And Dataverse is, you could say, kind of virtual environment that is available for a lot of universities and research institutions that is used to store data for researchers during their research. So it's also then possible to collaborate with your colleague researchers. Next to that, a very important function of DANS is also its function as a center of expertise. So we provide a lot of training, both internationally and in the Netherlands, and consultancy. And in that context, we are also working together with the Rijksmuseum. So that as a little introduction to the organization where I come from. Now let's move to the topic of today, data sharing. So data sharing is part of open science, and open science is a topic within science that has had a lot of attention over the last couple of years. You can see on the left-hand side our Minister of Education and Science, who is very much in favor of this open science movement and has also played an important role in Europe over the last couple of years. Because in Europe it's the same wind blowing. Also the European Commission really promotes open science and is now working very hard to realize a European open science cloud, an infrastructure that should make it possible to share all research data within Europe between researchers. Internationally, you see the same movement. Here you see a report from OECD. And of course, also in the heritage sector, in the GLAM sector, you see this movement towards openness very much, and we heard about that already earlier this morning. So what is open science? Open science is a kind of umbrella term, and the two main characteristics of open science are that let's say the scientific practices are completely transparent, and that you have the maximum ease of access to all the outcomes of research, be it journals, be it data, be it software, etc., etc. So here you see another graph saying open science, really three components: transparent research practices, like I said, but also open access publishing, and a lot of the attention first within science went to creating this open access towards, for journals, and now you see the attention over the last couple of years shifting towards data sharing and opening up data, also as an important part of this open science movement. But there are limits to openness, because open science, of course, must respect all kinds of boundaries. It can't be so that we just open up all the data that we gather. We need to set certain boundaries that can be in the area of copyright, you know all about that, but it can also be in the area of sensitiveness, sensitive data. So, for example, in the medical sciences, you can imagine that you can't open up data that contain personal information, but also in areas where you might expect it less. We at DANS, for example, are confronted with the fact that a lot of archaeological data can't be opened because you don't want treasure hunters to go to the excavation sites. In biology as well, endangered species, you don't want to give the geo-information where to find them. So these are things that we need to take into account, and therefore we like to say that data should be as openly available as possible, but as closed as well as necessary. Why is data sharing so important? Well, this has to do with the quality of research. It is very important that you can replicate and validate the outcomes of science, of research. This has to do with creating scientific integrity, and it has a lot to do, of course, with transparency. So we need to make it possible for people to check the findings of researchers in order to make sure that we have high quality research. Because if we don't, something like this can happen, and I think many of you remember this fraud scandal in the Netherlands, which involved a psychologist who had really made up his data. And that, of course, caused a lot of upheaval, not only in the scientific world, but also amongst the general public. So that is something that we need to prevent. But there is another element to data sharing, and that is, of course, the reuse, the possibility to reuse data. And that reuse is interesting in a sense that it makes research more efficient. It's also very interesting for funders because the outcomes of research that are funded with tax money, if you keep them available for others, that gives the funder a maximum return on their investment. And it, of course, also gives the possibility to stand on the shoulders of others in research. And here you see an example, a small example of that, which is rather close to my maritime historical heart. And here you see an article that describes how 19th century whaling books were used to do paleoclimatic research. Because these logbooks from the ships contain daily records of the weather conditions. And those records seemed very worthwhile to get a better understanding of climate change. And this is another example where they combined weather data with data on the occurrence of heart attacks, where they find a very interesting correlation. Again, reusing data for quite another purpose than where the data were initially created for. There we go. So having said that, you would think that there's no problem at all. Everybody would love to share their data if it brings so many good things, and we won't have those researchers anymore who say, it's my blood, sweat and tears that I spent to create my data set, and I want to reap the fruits of them, and I don't want anyone else to see. If it's so obvious that there are so many good things, probably everyone is sharing at the moment. Well, that's not completely the case. Because researchers, and there is of course a difference when you look at different disciplines, but all in all, researchers are not all jumping at the occasion yet to share their data. And their biggest concern seems to lie in their fear that their data might be misused by others. So there is a fear that probably other researchers, especially from other disciplines, don't understand the data that they have gathered. There is also a concern that maybe other researchers come to different conclusions on the basis of the same data set, and what would that mean for their reputation? Can also be that researchers have this feeling, I keep the data for myself because I want to publish and publish and publish, and I don't want anyone to scoop my publications. So there are some concerns there, and a lot of those concerns have to do with trust. So researchers need to feel that if they give away their data, they give them to someone who can be trusted. And then we go to data quality, because there is another side to this, and that is the side of the reuser of the data. Because that reuser also has a trust issue. They, when using a data set that was compiled by others, have a question, where do these data come from? Can I trust the researcher who created that data set? How were they collected? And also, of course, the question of provenance. If you find those data in a repository, what has happened with those data during the time that they were in the repository? So there are many questions also on the side of the data reuser. And that has to do with the quality of the data. Now, data quality is quite a difficult topic, because what is it? It has different aspects, different facets. There is scientific quality, there is the aspect of technical quality, and there is also an aspect that I would like to call fitness for use. So first of all, the scientific quality of a data set. We at DANS, having 117,000 data sets and a relatively small number of archivists, we can't measure or assess the scientific quality of the data, of the scientific method behind the data. So that is very much a case of research integrity. It's the responsibility, first and foremost, of the researcher to do their research in honestly, transparent, independent, responsible, etc., etc. But it's not only the individual researcher. Also, the institution in which that researcher works has a role to play. They need to make sure that they have the rules and the policies available, and that they support the researcher. And there is also the fact that researchers are very much influenced within the discipline that they work by their peers. So there is also a responsibility there for the, let's say, the disciplinary network in which researchers work, that people keep one another sharp and make sure that everything is done with a lot of integrity and that you get good quality results. Another dimension is the technical data quality, and there the archive can play a role, a repository can play a role. Data, just like any other product, have a quality that results from the process with which they are generated. But if you manage that process right, and if you document that process, then that really helps to build trust in your data, in the technical quality of your data. And there FAIR plays a role. And then finally, there is the element of fitness for use, or let's say the fitness for purpose. That is, of course, dependent on the view of the data consumer. If I, as a maritime historian, have two data sets, one is not so well documented, one is very well documented, but the first one is just a little bit better geared towards my research question, then I will probably still go for the one that is less documented because it's more fit for purpose for me. So it's a mixture of all of those elements that define data quality and that also define trust. So I'm going to look on my watch to see where we are time-wise. I'm fine? Okay. Data quality, like I said, the second dimension is that technical dimension of quality. And when you talk about that technical quality, the FAIR data principles start to play a role. For those 17 or 18 people in the room who were not aware of what those FAIR principles are, this slide is meant for you. And most of you know this. The FAIR data principles were scratched on a piece of paper in 2014 at a conference or a workshop in Leiden, where I happened to be. That was kind of a coincidence. It is very important to realize that those FAIR data principles were designed by a room full of people from the life sciences. Some people tend to forget that, but that is really where the origins of the FAIR principles lie. And that also has a consequence, and I will get back to that later on. Those people thought that it would be wise to define a couple of principles to make data more fit to share. And you see those principles here on the screen, the F for findable, which means that data need to be easy to find, not only for humans, but preferably also for machines. And you need metadata for that. The accessibility needs to be tended to on the basis of well-defined use licenses and access conditions. Interoperability is very important. That means that data sets should be ready to be linked to data sets from other sources. And finally, the element of reusability for future research. Data need to be ready for that as well, and they need to be ready to be used in for computational methods and tools. So quite a lot of requirements for data. This group worked on that for some time, and in the end, and of course it always takes a very long time before a journal, an article is published, and that happened 2 years after that workshop in 2016. In a publication in the Nature journal Scientific Data. So that is where the official publication can be found. What happened after that is that people thought, well, we have these 4 quite general principles. We also need to come up with a couple of requirements for people who want to comply with those 4 principles. And here you see the list of requirements that was then produced. I'm not, of course, going to go through all of them, but just to take one, if you look at the F for findable, it says that if you want to have your data completely findable, they need to have a persistent identifier. They need to be described with rich metadata, and that metadata should contain the identifier again, and the metadata and data should be registered or indexed in a searchable resource. So they really made it quite explicit how you can comply with those FAIR principles. What also directly shows here is that it is quite a lot, and that maybe in the life sciences a lot of it is easily realized. It might be quite different for other scientific disciplines and also for organizations that come from other sectors. So once this traction got on its way around those FAIR principles, there was a lot of interest, really right from the start, from funders and from policymakers. They loved this acronym FAIR, and they really incorporated it in lots and lots of policy documents that were published around open science and the future of Europe. And also, by the way, in national contexts. So here you see a couple of them. in Europe there is a very big chunk of funding available for research. And for all of that research, there came specific guidelines on fair data management. So the European Commission really adopted these FAIR principles into their rules and regulations for European funding for research. They also commissioned a big report on turning FAIR into a reality in Europe. So there was a lot of uptake from policy, and still is, from policymakers and funders in Europe, and also in other countries, and by the way, around the world, I can say. But what about the researchers? Did they jump up and really embrace FAIR? Well, here you see a result that was published quite recently of a large survey among researchers around the globe, and you see that still the majority has never ever heard of FAIR. So there is a very interesting discrepancy here that from the provider side, we and the funders and the policymakers, everyone loves FAIR, but the researchers themselves, they haven't really heard of it, at least the majority. I personally have a kind of love-hate relationship with this FAIR concept. And there are a couple of reasons for that. What I notice in the scientific debate is that people talk about fair or not fair. So you have fair data or your data are not fair. For me, that is ridiculous. I think we need to talk about a continuum. Fair is a nice dot to achieve, but it is also very important that we understand that it will never ever be possible for all data in science to be completely 100% fair according to those metrics. It can't be that we will have everything machine readable, everything completely interoperable. So for me, I would like to talk in terms like, is it fair enough? So you need to do your best to make your data as fair as possible. But if we say it needs to comply with all of those metrics, then we lose touch with a lot of disciplines, and that cannot be what we are looking for. So for me, it's a continuum. What I also notice is that people keep mixing up open data and fair data. And open data can be 100% open, but completely unfair. If they are not documented, etc., etc., it can be completely unusable, although it's completely open. Also the other way around, of course. You can have data sets, medical data sets that are completely fair, but they are not open and they will never ever be. So mixing these two things up is something that is a little bit dangerous. And then another confusion, open, sometimes people have the idea that all the open data are also freely available. And yesterday I was at a conference, and one of the people in the audience as well, where we heard that 100% open doesn't always mean 100% free, because there are data sets, for example, statistical data that need a lot of work and that you have to pay for. So that is also a misunderstanding that I see happening now and again. What I also think, fair is a buzzword, and that's good because it helps us to gain extra attention for data management. That is a good thing, but for me it is something that we have been doing for a very long time already. It's about responsible research data management. So it's nothing new, but you see that it's now being picked up because of this new term. I talked already a lot about trust. Trust in a sense that a data producer needs to trust, and there needs also to be trust with a data reuser. I like very much this quote that says, perhaps the biggest challenge in sharing data is trust. How do you create a system that is robust enough for scientists to trust that if they share, their data won't be lost, garbled, stolen, or misused? That is really the big challenge that we are facing. And data don't become nor stay fair by magic. The researcher needs to do a lot, but what we also need is all kinds of people and infrastructure around that researcher to make it possible that data are fair and also remain fair. How many minutes do I have left? 5, so I need to hurry up a bit. 10, okay, then I'll be okay. Thank you for that. So lots of people, not only that researcher, lots of people around that researcher and lots of infrastructures as well. This is a nice example from a research that did a review under researchers a little bit older, 2017, where 36 of the respondents said that they had lost data during their work. And you saw a very high correlation there between the vehicle where they stored their data and the occurrence of data loss. It turned out that there are still, of course, a lot of researchers who keep their data on their USB stick or their computer hard drive, and that is really not what we want. And you see the accidents happening. But where do you go once you have finished your research and you want to store your data? That's not easy either. Here you see a registry called Re3 Data. And as you can see, you can find there, where do I see the number? 2,361 repositories, places where you can deposit data. So where do you find the one where your data are best placed and that is fit for the purpose of your data? That is quite a needle in a haystack. So what we are trying to do within Europe is to create a network of trustworthy digital repositories where people can store their data for the long term in order to have them available to share. And of course, any repository can say, well, I am very transparent and competent and predictable and sustainable and I want to do a good thing. But of course, it's also very important that you have a kind of third-party acknowledgement of that. It's always nice if other people tell that you are doing a good job. And that is especially something that funders and publishers are looking for. Maybe not so much the researchers, because the researchers really depend on and look for the opinions of their peers. They follow their peers in that sense, where they store their data. But funders and publishers are looking for instruments to point their researchers to the right trustworthy repositories. And we have been working very hard with a lot of people around the world to establish a community-driven repository certification standard that is now available. It has been developed under the umbrella of the Research Data Alliance that some of you might know. That contains 16 requirements that a repository needs to comply with in order to receive such a seal, a core trust seal. And in that way, if a repository complies with all those requirements and that is acknowledged by this third party, that can give data producers and funding bodies and the consumers of data and the repositories those three categories really trust into that repository, that they can store their data there and use the data. And it also helps data repositories to further professionalize their organizations. So this is a very important development, and at the moment we have around 150 repositories around the world that have this certification. So I hope that I have made clear to you that we need to share our data within research in order to turn open science into a reality. It's really a very important component of open science. And I think that those FAIR principles really help us to define high quality and also transparent research data management practices. We really need those FAIR principles because just having open data is not enough. But we also need to make sure that we have a research data infrastructure for data sharing that is trustworthy. And certification mechanisms like the Core Trust Seal I mentioned play a very important role there because they really make it possible that we will have accessibility, not only that, but also the accessibility of data available for the future. So, last bit. What does all of this mean for you? I think that also within the heritage sector, and I have been involved quite a long time also in the Netwerk Digitaal Erfgoed, there is also the open access trend, and of course that also leads within your institutions to really a deluge of digital material, digital surrogates of material objects, but also of course a lot of digital data coming from research around these objects. So that also means that you are starting to face the same problems that we are having for some time. And that is, you know, here you see a couple of examples, copyright management, proper licensing, but also the importance of having rich documentation and rich metadata that you were already talking about to be able to explore the context of objects and to discover also the connection between objects. And for finding meaning. And of course, all of these data, if you finish your research on the Night Watch, there will be so many data that you want to keep and store and preserve for the long term. So open access is not enough. We need responsible research data management for that as well. I want to finish off with a couple of mentions of things that we have done in the area of science that might be helpful for you as well. So here you see a reference to a training that is available online that we have set up together with a number of partners in the Netherlands, at Dans, around research data management. Of course, not all of it is very relevant for you because it's based on science, but I'm pretty sure that elements in it might be of use. Another thing I would like to mention is a project, European project called Parthenos, which is a project in the area of arts and humanities, where a lot of work has gone into creating guidelines to verify data management and make data reusable. And it contains 20 guidelines, again around those 4 letters, that are really, really very hands-on. Focused on the one hand on data producers and researchers, on the other hand also on infrastructure and on data archives. So just to show you what it looks like, for the F, for example, you get very clear guidance on what you need to do. And for a couple of these elements, we also have things already available in the Netherlands. So for example, it refers to using persistent identifiers. And the Netwerk Digitaal Erfgoed has a nice PID guide that helps you to decide what kind of persistent identifier you could use. If you look at the interoperable, again, many suggestions. One of them being that you need to make use of future-proof file formats. We already heard about the Rijksmuseum having loads and loads of files, both open, both proprietary. It's very good to think about what kinds of file formats you are using. And again, we have a tool for that. So for example, at Dans, we have a very long list of preferred formats for all kinds of digital data. And there is a lot of information available, so that might be of interest for you as well. And then, in the last 3 minutes, I would like to point you to the Research Data Alliance, which is a very international, truly global, open organization of data experts, people working in the area of research data. And you can become a member of that. 9,000 people already are around the globe. And it's completely free. You just register on the website, and it gives you access to really a wealth of information. 100 groups are working there on all kinds of aspects of data sharing. And there is also attention for the digital humanities. Here you see a number of groups that are active at the moment, but also the more generic groups might be relevant for you around metadata, identifiers, and also a lot around policies. So that's a pointer for you. And a final pointer is a pointer to a European project that is really the focal project around implementing FAIR in science in Europe. A 10 million euro project, and Dans is coordinating that project. That will no doubt in the coming 2 years create a lot of outcomes that could be of interest for you as well. Pointer on the slide again. So I think that there are lots of opportunities for science and the GLAM sector to share knowledge and to share expertise. We are really facing the same data issues, and it's very nice to see that in that week of digital heritage here in the Netherlands next week, there is a networking event that will bring people from science together with people from the GLAM sector. So in that sense, I think the future looks bright. Thank you very much.